About an hour ago, Donald Trump addressed the American people. This followed an address from Prime Minister Albanese of Australia to his people, as well as Prime Minister Starmer to the British people. And in both speeches by Starmer and Albanese, they told the people that they knew fuel and gas prices were going up, and that more pain should be expected, but they would do as much as they could to ensure people's wallets were not too heavily impacted. Donald Trump, in his address to the American people, basically said that this war would continue, and that America might start bombing Iran's energy and oil infrastructure. So let's listen to a few of his words. Our economy is strong and improving by the day, and it will soon be roaring back like never before. It will top the levels that it was a month ago. I've made clear from the beginning of Operation Epic Fury that we will continue until our objectives are fully achieved. Thanks to the progress we've made, I can say tonight that we are on track to complete all of America's military objectives shortly, very shortly. We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to bring them back to the Stone Age where they belong. Okay, so he's basically saying that they're winning this war and that they will bomb them back to the Stone Age, which tells us that he's actually not winning this war. Okay, now I also want to look at another person, Peter Hegseth. New strategic map. So remember, this war in Iran is not ending. In fact, many people believe it is only starting to ramp up. There are rumors that Donald Trump has already authorized the use of ground forces, so we could see an invasion of Iran as early as this weekend, but definitely sometime this month. Okay. But while America is fighting this war in Iran, the Secretary of Defense, Peter Hegseth, has announced that America will control all of North America, from Greenland to the Gulf of America to the Panama Canal and its surrounding countries. At the Department of War, we call this strategic map the Greater North America. Why? Because every sovereign nation and territory north of the equator, from Greenland to Ecuador and from Alaska to Guyana, is not part of the global south. It is a security perimeter in this great neighborhood that we all live in. Okay, so basically what he's saying is that they will enforce the Monroe Doctrine in North America. So it sounds very strange to people that Donald Trump is fighting this war in Iran, which is not really winnable, while at the same time being aggressive in North America. He's picking fights with Canada, with Denmark over Greenland, with Colombia, with Mexico, and with Cuba. In fact, he's embargoing Cuba right now, and people expect a possible invasion of Cuba very soon. So people think Donald Trump is all over the place and completely idiotic. Okay, so this is Iran, and everyone says that a ground invasion of Iran would be stupid because it is far too large to invade. Right now, America has only about 50,000 troops in the Middle East, and the geography and terrain make it very difficult to control. Okay, so you have the Zagros Mountains, which allow the Iranians to hide, conduct guerrilla warfare, and use drone and artillery strikes. Then you have the desert, which makes crossing extremely difficult. Okay, so even if the Americans attacked from Iraq, they would have to face the mountains. If they attacked from Pakistan in the east, they would have to cross deserts. And if they attacked from the south, they would face mountains again. Also, they would still be far away from Tehran, which is ultimately the objective. Okay, so there are many conversations about what the Americans are trying to do. Right now, the consensus seems to be that the Americans first want to control the Strait of Hormuz in order to increase pressure on the global economy. Okay, but as you can see from this map, first of all, the strait is not very wide and it is extremely close to the Iranian coastline and mountains, making it easy to attack from. The Iranians could also place mines throughout the strait, so what everyone says is that an invasion of Iran would simply be idiotic. At the same time, the Americans need to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and allow maritime navigation in order to stabilize the global economy. Okay, already we are seeing many signs that America is preparing for a long war. There are already 50,000 troops in the Middle East, and many of them will likely be deployed against Iran. There was also a letter from Leonard Anderson to the reserves telling them they must prepare to deploy, fight, and win. Okay, so not only have they sent 50,000 troops to the Middle East, but they are also preparing to call up reserves. This makes it seem as though America is preparing for total war. Polymarket is a very interesting place to understand how global events may unfold. And there are 3 indicators suggesting that a ground invasion is coming. First, the pizza index is exploding. What does this mean? It means that when Pentagon staff prepare to launch a ground invasion, they work overtime and order lots of pizza. So pizza deliveries are increasing. Second, gay bars are empty. When people have less free time, they stop going out on dates. Third, people are making large bets that a ground invasion will happen. These are people believed to have inside information, so they go onto Polymarket and place bets knowing what may happen. One person reportedly bet $200,000 that a ground invasion would occur, and if it does, he could win over $1 million. Okay, so these are being presented as 3 strong indicators that a ground invasion has been approved and could happen very soon. Okay. Donald Trump himself has said many things. He said that if America leaves the Middle East, it's not a problem and they don't really care. He also said that NATO is responsible for opening the Strait of Hormuz because Europe needs the oil. Of course, NATO is angry at Donald Trump because before this war in Iran, he had already threatened to take over Greenland. So Donald Trump appears disorganized and impulsive. But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that a ground invasion goes ahead. What happens then? Well, as predicted earlier, if a ground invasion happens, America could lose the war because Iran is fully prepared for such an invasion. Second, if America loses, then the American empire could weaken significantly because it could be pushed out of the Middle East. They could lose the petrodollar system and the US dollar's role as the global reserve currency. Third, the global economy could collapse. So clearly, the argument being made here is that Donald Trump would be the worst president in history. But then another perspective is introduced. What if Donald Trump actually wants the American empire to collapse? What if he wants to destroy the global economy? Then from that perspective, he would appear to be a genius rather than a fool. Okay, so the argument being presented is that all this chaos is intentional and part of a larger strategy. So what is the plan? The first thing to notice is that the world gets about 20% of its oil from the Middle East, primarily supplying East Asia. India gets around 6% of its oil from the Middle East, while Japan gets around 75%. Europe also relies heavily on Middle Eastern oil, so the world depends on GCC oil. If this war continues and ground forces are used, Middle Eastern oil production could collapse. JP Morgan reportedly warned that by mid-April, the world could face severe oil shortages. But the issue goes beyond energy. Iran restricting movement through the Strait of Hormuz creates shortages in oil, LNG, phosphate, ammonium, sulfur, and urea, which are all critical for fertilizer and food production. That means countries may not only run out of energy, but also face food shortages. Helium and sulfur are also essential for semiconductor production, which affects AI and modern technology. So this conflict impacts the entire modern economy. Now the argument shifts again. What if this is all part of a larger strategy? There is plenty of oil outside the Middle East. Canada, Venezuela, and Russia all possess enormous reserves. Venezuela has the world's largest known oil reserves. So if the Strait of Hormuz closes, the world does not suddenly lose all oil. Instead, the world becomes more dependent on North America and Russia. That means global economic power shifts toward North America and Russia. The argument suggests that America may start a costly and unwinnable war in the Middle East, yet still benefit because the world becomes more dependent on North American resources. Then attention turns toward who consumes more oil than they export. Europe, East Asia, and Australia rely heavily on imported oil. Therefore, if Middle Eastern oil becomes unavailable, these regions must turn to North America or Russia. The same logic is applied to fertilizer production. Nitrogen is essential for fertilizer, and many regions would become increasingly dependent on North America for agricultural resources. Then water resources are discussed. Regions with abundant fresh water, such as North America and Russia, are described as more stable. Regions with less water, including parts of Africa, Europe, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia, are described as more vulnerable to instability and conflict. So the conclusion being drawn is that North America and Russia possess long-term advantages in resources and stability, while other regions face growing pressure. The discussion then turns to China. China has large freshwater resources, but much of that water originates in the Tibetan Plateau and flows into Southeast Asia and India. In a future drought scenario, there could be conflict over water access. The summary then focuses on oil reserves. Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Canada, Iraq, the UAE, Kuwait, the United States, and Russia are highlighted as major oil reserve holders. The argument claims that if war disrupts Middle Eastern oil production, North America and Russia become even more important suppliers. Attention then shifts to oil importers such as China, India, Japan, and South Korea, all of which depend heavily on Middle Eastern oil. The discussion also focuses on U.S. debt. America reportedly holds around $39 trillion in debt, and many Asian and European countries buy U.S. Treasury bonds. The argument suggests that because Europe and Asia would still need energy, fertilizer, and resources from North America, they would continue supporting the U.S. financial system despite concerns about debt. So the conclusion is that America's debt problem becomes less dangerous if the world remains dependent on North American resources. Finally, the argument compares this strategy to Russia's approach in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine is described as a long war of attrition that helps Russia industrialize its economy around military production. Military industries have expanded while civilian industries have weakened. Russia's domestic drone production has reportedly increased significantly since the beginning of the war, reducing dependence on Iranian imports. The argument claims Russia is restructuring its economy for long-term war production and could eventually export drones and military equipment to allies like Iran. This is then connected to what is called the Third Rome Plan, linked to the 1996 book Foundations of Geopolitics by Alexander Dugin, who is described as an influential geopolitical thinker. VidIQ,